What has been the most baddest sheet done by real people in history? Leonid Rogozov had to perform an appendectomy on himself while overwintering in the Antarctic. In a similar vein, Inés Ramirez Perez performed a cesarean section on herself. She wasn't a doctor or a surgeon. She was a rural Mexican woman with no medical training. Ramirez cut herself open, pulled her baby out of her own uterus, passed out, then regained consciousness and bandaged herself. The nearest hospital was 8 hours away and she'd been in labor for 12, so she was desperate. Both of them survived. The life of Peter Julian Ortiz is a long string of these. He was an absolute madlad who sounds like a character straight from a James Bond film. He was a dual citizen of France and AMP, the United States, French father, American mother, a combat veteran of the French Foreign Legion, a US Marine Corps officer, and the most decorated operative of the OSS, Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner to the CIA, in the Second World War while serving with the OSS and operating with the French resistance in a German-occupied France. He was once tasked with rescuing downed British RAF aircrew. Unfortunately, the Germans got there first. Undeterred, he donned a German officer's uniform and used the German he had picked up while a POW. He was captured while serving with the Legion during the German invasion of France, later escaping with the help of an Austrian nurse he'd seduced, to bluff the soldiers holding them captive into releasing them into his custody. But wait, there's more. There was still the issue of getting the downed RAF aircrew out of German-occupied France. He did this using cars he stolen from the Gestapo's own motor pool, at a time when the Gestapo knew he was actively hunting him, and had a cash bounty on his head. He then used the Gestapo's vehicles to safely drive the British aircrew past German army checkpoints and across the border into neutral Spain. Other highlights from his career was that he believed the presence of a uniformed Allied officer bolstered the morale of the French resistance, so when leading the Maquis on sabotage missions or ambushes of German troops, he'd wear his US Marine Corps officer's uniform openly in German-occupied France. On another occasion, while eavesdropping on German officers in a French bar, something he frequently did in order to gather intelligence, he heard one of them drunkenly curse the local resistance, the American operative that had been spotted with them, him, and President Roosevelt. Rather than simply ignoring it, Ortiz slipped back to local safe house, changed into his US Marine Corps uniform, equipped 2 pistols, and a raincoat to conceal his uniform. He then returned to the bar where he ordered a round of drinks for the officers, shrugged off the raincoat revealing his uniform, leveled his pistols at the astonished German officers, and ordered them to raise a toast to the United States Marine Corps and President Roosevelt. Once the officers had completed their toast, he donned the raincoat again and escaped into the night. Some versions of the story claim he killed the officers, but Ortiz denied it, saying he thought it better to keep them alive as they would repeat the tale of how they'd been humiliated by the OSS agent they were hunting, and it would undermine morale. Miriam Rodriguez Martinez. Her daughter was kidnapped and murdered by the Mexican cartel. The police didn't lift a finger to help, so she tracked down and arrested 10 cartel members herself. She knew it would result in her death. She did it anyway. "I don't care if they kill me," Rodriguez told a friend, according to the New York Times. "I died the day they killed my daughter. I want to end this. I'm going to take out the people who hurt my daughter and they can do whatever they want to me." Sadly, her words proved prophetic as she was murdered by the cartel on the 10th of May 2017, which is Mother's Day in Mexico. Was it coincidence that it was Mother's Day, or did the cartel just have a really sick sense of humor? Witold Pilecki. His mission at Auschwitz is one of the most extraordinary acts of bravery in World War I history. In 1940, Pilecki, a member of the Polish resistance, volunteered to infiltrate Auschwitz by allowing himself to be captured during a Nazi roundup in Warsaw. Under the alias Tomasz Serafiski, he endured brutal conditions and unimaginable horrors upon his arrival at the camp. Once inside, Pilecki organized a clandestine resistance network called the Union of Military Organization, ZAL. He meticulously documented the daily atrocities, including the mass executions and the inhumane living conditions. His reports, smuggled out through couriers, were among the first comprehensive accounts of the Holocaust to reach the Western Allies and the Polish government in exile, providing critical intelligence and calling for action. After nearly 3 years of enduring and documenting the camp's horrors, Pilecki realized that an internal uprising was impossible without external support. In April 1943, he orchestrated a daring escape with 2 fellow inmates. Despite the constant threat of capture, he made his way back to Warsaw, where he continued his resistance activities. Pilecki's detailed reports on Auschwitz were instrumental in informing the world about the genocide occurring within its barbed wire fences, making his mission one of the most significant acts of resistance during the war. British pilot in World War I was flying a scouting mission when he was attacked by 7 German planes. On the first pass, his leg was blown off by the German planes, but he managed to move the plane so his rear gunner could fire on the German fighters. They managed to drive off all 7. The pilot managed to land the plane despite rapidly losing blood and insisted that he delivered his reconnaissance report before receiving medical attention. His back gunner had no idea he'd lost his leg until they landed. The pilot won the Victoria Cross for his actions. Edit: the pilot's name was Ferdinand West. He survived the war and lived until 1988. My great-granddad. French POW during WW2 who, along with a friend, killed a couple Nazi guards, swiped their uniforms and then somehow made it over to the US, where he met my great-grandmother. Side note, the Nazis would force him to make ammo as a POW, but right before the boxes were shut to be sent off, he and his other pals would piss on the contents to make them corrode and be useless by the time they were actually opened. People who were forced to make ammo used to sabotage it very often. It saved a US bomber from being shot down after its fuel tank was struck by around 20 duds. They also had a message of hope inside them. Yarnhub made a video on this but I can't find it. Robert Small's a slave who stole a Confederate ship out of Charleston Harbor and turned it over to the Union, who in turn made him a pilot of one of their ships. Total badass. I had to scroll a ways down to see this. We recently moved to Beaufort and his name is everywhere so we looked it up. He was a former slave who stole a Confederate ship and piloted that ship along with his family, the families of his crew, and friends, into Union territory. The ship was repurposed into a warship and his actions convinced Lincoln to allow African American soldiers into the Union Army. He then returned to Beaufort where he was born and purchased his former owner's property which was seized by the government. Not only that but he allowed the wife of his former master to move back into her house until she passed. He went on to purchase a 2-story building to be used as a school for African American children. He has an extensive political career after that and pushed several bills for equality regardless of skin color. Perhaps my memory is old but I don't think they touched too much on this in history class. Napoleon Bonaparte coming back from Elba, meeting up with the 5th Regiment of Infantry, sent from Paris to kill him. Steps off his horse with no weapon, walks towards the regiment and shouts, "Soldiers, recognize your emperor. If any of you wants to kill me, here I am." The soldiers drop their weapons and send their hats flying, shouting glory to the emperor. This has got to be the most insane natural 20 on a charisma check in history. Isabella of France held off an army with herself, her maids, and anyone else who remained in the castle she was holed up in after her husband the King of England ran off with his lover, returned home to France, and then came back with an army to install her son on the throne instead. Street. Olga of Kiev was not necessarily the most badass, but clever enough that when she turned down a proposal from the Byzantine emperor himself, he gave her the dowry he would have offered anyway, no strings attached. Willing for dump about her upon request. Franz Stigler, who upon coming upon a defenseless and battered B-17, not only couldn't bring himself to shoot them down, but escorted the American crew all the way to the English Channel. Along the way he warded off other German fighters and flew close enough to the aircraft that German AA wouldn't open fire on it. The crew survived the encounter and Stigler turned around and returned to his base once they left German airspace. the chef on the Titanic who spent the whole time helping others off. Then, as the ship was sinking, drunk a fuck ton of wine, and survived thanks to the alcohol keeping him warm and stimulating his system. Edit. Didn't expect this to blow up. Here's some context. Joan was the chief baker, not chef. He knew that he wouldn't be saved, so had a drink of liquor, helped others off the boat, and then returned to his cabin and drank more. Having yielded a seat on a lifeboat, he then threw deck chairs and other objects off the boat, in the hopes that they would act as floats for those in the water. One of the last to enter the water, and also, apparently, a competent swimmer, he swam in the water for 2.5 hours. He did find a lifeboat in that time, but it was full. He suffered no serious injuries. I always assumed that the alcohol had something to do with his survival, but as pointed out, it actually makes you lose body heat, vasodilation giving the illusion of warmth, so I guess his survival was up to keeping a cool head. John Stap strapped himself to a rocket in the desert and shot it off to measure how much deceleration G's the human body could take, at one point going blind, temporarily, breaking his wrists, breaking ribs and losing the fillings in his teeth. The test results were basically, did you die, and if not, he'd up the ante. He did this 29 times total. Pictures of the tests look like Wile E. Coyote rockets with a lawn chair on top. He held a land speed record with his rig and another record for the most G-forces survived by a human, voluntarily, 46.2 grams. His research is what made ejection seats work for pilots but also was used for airbags and car crash safety stuff. The guy saved untold lives and continues to do so posthumously. Plus, he was a doctor and seemed like a really nice guy. I can only imagine the amount of rocket force necessary to propel gonads that big. Stanislav Petrov, the man who saved the world from nuclear annihilation. During the Cold War in 1983, he was the commanding officer at an early warning satellite command center in Russia, whose system detected 1, and then another 5, nuclear missiles fired from the US towards Russia. Protocol was for him to immediately warn his superiors, who would launch a rapid full counter-air assault against the US within minutes of the threat detection. However, Petrov hesitated. He was confused as to why the US, if they indeed intended to attack Russia with missiles, would only fire 6 instead of a full-scale missile attack. He chose not to follow protocol and report the attack, which prevented Russia from firing their counter-launch. He declared that the system must have been reporting a false alarm given how few missiles the US were firing. It turned out, he was right. The early warning detection satellite system falsely detected the sun reflecting off of clouds as US missile launches. This incident remained classified for 15 years, before being made public in 1998. He is credited as being the man who saved the world. During the Second English-Dutch War in 1667, the Dutch Republic wanted to take revenge on England for destroying 150 silk merchant ships. Due to money shortage, the better part of the English fleet was called back to the motherland. Their crew fired and the ships docked at Chatham, England's most important naval base. Johan de Witt believed a single big victory would greatly enhance the Dutch bargaining power and bring about a fast end to the war. De Witt planned to destroy the docked ships in Chatham, a risky effort that would achieve his goal. His officers had doubts it would work, considering the ever-shifting sandbanks in the river mouth of the Thames. To make sure the mission would succeed, he sent Admiral Michael D. Reiter to lead the mission, and his brother Cornelis de Witt to watch over him. Under the cover of night, they sailed up the River Thames, and later the Medway until they reached Chatham. They destroyed 10 small vessels, 3 large ones, and entered the HMS Unity, a previously captured Dutch ship, and HMS Royal Charles, an 80-cannon 3-decker first-rate ship, both flagships of the English fleet, and towed them all the way back to the Netherlands. This was the single biggest loss for the English Navy, and led to a fast end of the war as Johan de Witt had planned. Of the HMS Royal Charles, the sternpiece can be seen to this day in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Sadly for the de Witt brothers, 5 years later during the disaster year of 1672, they would be lynched and eaten by an angry mob. Dutch history is wild. That Finnish sniper that got nicknamed the White Death or something. He had 500 something confirmed kills. He would put snow in his mouth so his breath wouldn't expel heat that could be seen. Simo Horan scope only to prevent reflected light. He killed entire squads that were sent to heal him, specifically got shot by an exploding bullet in the face at the end of the war, woke up after it ended, went back to a normal farming life after. When asked how he got so good at shooting, his answer was practice. Cliff Young breaking the record for the Sydney-Melbourne Ultra Marathon. Before Cliff, the top ultramarathoners would run the race in about 7 days by running 17 hours a day and sleeping for 7. Then came Cliff, a 61-year-old sheep farmer, who'd previously been diagnosed with arthritis in his knees. He showed up out of the blue, wearing sheety old shoes, and when asked about why he was in the race said something to the effect of, "We could never afford a dog on the farm, so when the storms come and I have to chase the sheep down. That takes about 3 days. I figure this will take another 2. People laugh. The race started and Cliff started running with a funny little shuffle and people laughed more. By the end of the first day, he was way behind. Everyone went to bed and forgot about him. In the morning they weren't laughing. Cliff had been running all night and was way ahead. Turns out running down the sheep meant he ran down thousands of sheep over thousands of acres for 3 days straight. He ended up sleeping only about 1 hour a night for 5 straight days. Not only did he win, but he broke the record by almost 2 full days. He only learned about the 10k in prize money after he won, and promptly divided it among the other racers because they worked just as hard as I did. He started the race unknown. He finished a national treasure. Not the most baddest sheet, but just a couple months back, Englishman Russ Cook completed his run from the southernmost to the northernmost point of Africa. Almost 10,000 miles in just under a year. That's more than a standard marathon every day. Samuel Witmore was 78 when the British attacked Concord and Lexington and were driven back to Boston on the 19th of April, 1775. This is considered the start of the American Revolution. He was farming when he heard what had happened, and that the British were coming through Menotomy, now Arlington. So he went and got his musket and pistols and hid behind a wall. When a scouting party for the British appeared, he jumped up and killed 2, possibly a third. He was shot in the face, tearing part of it off. He was bayoneted several times and beaten with the muskets of the British. They left him for dead, to retreat back to Boston. And he did die. Almost 18 years later on the 2nd of February of 1793.